football writer at The Athletic. I do TV stuff and some radio stuff for SiriusXM. Grace is our Clemson beat writer and also does stuff larger within the ACC. So we figured that we'll do mostly open for questions because we figure that would be the most helpful. But I'll ask you a couple, then you can ask me, and then we'll open it up. So Grace, how long have you been on this beat in particular, and how have you felt yourself get more comfortable? Like, when did you feel like you kind of knew what you were doing?
So I have been on the Clemson beat since 2017. So this is my 5th season. And I would say I really kind of started to find my footing probably around season 3. Once I had multiple recruiting classes, a full cycle of juniors that declared early for the draft, and just at Clemson it's a little unique. Coaches until this week don't usually leave, and so just being there every week I think got me a little more comfortable, and just, I don't know, you just kind of learn the nuances of beat reporting, I think, just by doing it. So
was there a story you wrote that you felt like you would not have been able to do, like in your first year on the beat?
Definitely. I think that one of my favorite stories I've written is I wrote about Trevor Lawrence's older brother, who is this incredible artist. And I would not have been able to do that had I not known Trevor's mom, had I not had somewhat of a relationship with Trevor himself, had I not been able to reach out to the brother and his wife kind of through them. And that's just the same thing, being there. These players knowing that you're going to be a beat reporter that is interviewing them every day, and just kind of building those relationships, which I think, Nicole, is something you're extremely good at. And I don't know, I always love to just pick your brain about how you source and connect with people.
Okay, we can do that, but I still have another question for you. So when you're a beat writer and you're there every day, you get to know everyone really well, but then they also get mad at you when you have to be critical or something is happening and you have to cover like an arrest or something off the field. How do you handle that, where like it's obviously super beneficial to see these people every day, but they also definitely like take stuff out on the beat writers or don't always agree with everything that you write?
Yeah, I think that's just part of it. And when you're a beat writer, you just understand that kind of comes with the territory. But anytime that I've ever written anything that upset a player or a coach or an administrator, every single time I've been really proud of the fact that I could say, where am I inaccurate, or where is this unfair? And when the answer is, if the answer is no, you're not inaccurate and you're not unfair, then I always feel really confident in that. And I think that's just being confident in your reporting and understanding it is part of it. But as long as you're correct and as long as you're fair, they can pick a bone with you if you want, but you can stand on the ground that you're reporting. Okay, now I'm gonna ask you a question. Okay, what would be, especially because, Nicole, you're in a unique situation in that you climbed the ladder extremely quickly. You were a national writer at 22 years old. I guess, A, how did you do that? And B, what would be your advice to younger reporters kind of in these first steps of their careers as they're trying to network and make these relationships?
Yeah, it's really overwhelming, and that's why I was asking about like how long it took to get comfortable, because I think starting on a beat is really a much more natural process because you actually get to see the people that you're building the relationships with every day. So it was super overwhelming to be 22 and to be suddenly a national college basketball reporter and looking at, oh my gosh, there's 330 programs, so that's 330 head coaches. Something could happen at any of them. And also they have 3 assistants, and then they have like a director of ops. So it's just all of these people. And I kept thinking like, I'm never going to catch up. There's all these people who've been doing this for so much longer than me. And what I started to do, and this is something anyone can do in any role, because you can do this in your job, because there's always events happening that people are too lazy to go to. So like there were lunches that coaches would come to. Like I was living in DC working at USA Today. There would be like a thing in Baltimore, and it would be like a coaches versus cancer lunch. And it would be 4 coaches, and it would be an hour to drive to. I was basically going for the 5 minutes afterwards to say, hi, I'm Nicole Auerbach. I am new college basketball reporter at USA Today. Here's my card. Like, I would love to get to know you. I just wanted to introduce myself. But I was going for the 5 minutes. And a lot of what I've done, especially in those first few years, was going things just to say hello and just to like shake someone's hand. So I went to, like, my favorite story related to that was at that luncheon, which was one of the first things. There were also some recruiting events in the area. I basically just kind of looked at a radius around where I lived and was like, okay, what is reasonable to go to? Again, knowing that a lot of the time you're just sitting and waiting for someone and that's it. But you go for that 5 minutes. And so I would, hey, Justin, that's our another great beat writer at The Athletic, Justin. He covers Cincinnati. So we can ask him lots of questions because I have a lot of questions about their season. So, you know, at that luncheon, I went and introduced myself to Jay Wright at Villanova. And he was like, hey, Nicole, yeah, so great to meet you. If you ever want to come to Villanova, come. I'll take you to lunch. I'll introduce you to my whole staff and our athletic director. Just come up for a day. So instead of being like, oh, he didn't mean that, I said, okay, look, I'm going to take him up on this. So I did that. And I got to know his whole staff. I maintained relationships with all of them. And then when he won his first national championship years later, because I'd been making extra trips to go to Villanova, to call him for trend stories, to maintain that he was hearing from me a lot. And then also, like, you know, if you ran into, you know, at Peach Jam or a recruiting event, like also just talking about things that aren't basketball to make sure that, like, we had a relationship. So then when he wins his national championship at 2 a.m, they know me and they'll let me behind the curtain, behind the party, and I can sit down with him and get an exclusive interview with him and his wife at 2 a.m. after he just won his first national championship. But that was years later. So it's like all those little things. I went, when I lived in New York, I went to Fordham on a Wednesday night because VCU was playing Fordham. They killed them by like 40, but it was literally just to shake Shaka Smart's hand. So, and he was like, oh, wow, Nicole, like, why'd you come to this? I was like, just to say hi. Like, you know, I mean, like, what was more a better use of my time than going to that? But cold calling people is really hard. No one likes doing that. But so that's why I think, like, at the key, you know, for you, like, aren't there events that that the coaches or players would go to around town that, like, that maybe not every beat writer goes to? Like, what's an example of that on the local level?
Wednesday night practice, honestly. Like, a lot of reporters don't come to Wednesday night practice just because we talk to coaches on Monday and Tuesday and Sunday and Saturday. But yeah, I mean, my follow-up question for you, though, would be, and I think this is hard on every level, the beat level and the national level, is you go to one of these events, you shake these hands, okay, you meet Jay Wright, and it goes great. How do you then parlay that into getting a phone number, talking about things via text message that aren't always related to the sport? Like, how do you, that's something that doesn't come naturally to me, like making small talk with strangers on text. Like, how do you parlay that into that?
So it's definitely easier with certain people than other people. Like, there's lots of people who, you know, like, I'll have a couple people who love to read everything and keep up with everything that's going on in college sports. So they just want to talk every day. Like, oh, did you see this thing? Like, what do you think of this? Or, you know, if you heard anything about this. And that's all. It was really helpful because A, they're super chatty. B, they'll give you ideas because they'll say, like, oh, this weird thing is happening with, like, the name, image, and likeness issue at, you know, this other school I just heard about, one of my friends who works there. But also, there's going to be people who aren't like that, or especially when you're starting out and you're a lot younger than the people that you cover, especially coaches, or in the pros, like, you know, you might be covering players who are a lot older than you. It's hard to find something that's, like, common ground. But I always try to ask about people's families, and some of these coaches do have kids that are either, like, the same age as, like, maybe nieces and nephews, or younger siblings are not too far off, or they do have kids around your age that are applying for college and things like that. But, you know, hopefully they'll ask about your life. You know, I talk to a lot of them about my dog. Love to send dog pictures to other people who have dogs. And then they send them back. So it's a very positive experience. But yeah, it's just, the key is just to make people feel like you're not only hitting them up when you need information, because we wouldn't want that either. I mean, and you guys can tell too, right? Like, when you know, even I remember being a student journalist, and there was, like, someone who was just, like, kind of, we'd go in a press box. I went to Michigan, so there would be national writers. There would be, like, you know, people from the Detroit Free Press. And this one guy would just, like, always, you could just tell he was just, like, trying to network the whole time. And it just felt like he was pumping people for information about, like, how did they get their job? It was just not personable. And there's ways where you can eventually get to that stuff, especially with people in the press box, but it doesn't have to be the first question. Like, you can ask them other stuff or talk about other topics, even if they're about sports, but not like the game you're covering. And like, what do you think is going to win and why? There's other things you can talk to people about. So I've always tried asking about families. If I were to run into someone today, if I were to go over to Wake Forest for, to see Dave Clausen, I'd ask him, okay, so like, when are you leaving for the bowl? Do you get any time with your family? What has the season been like? Do you catch your breath at all? Off-season trips planned? Like, I would ask those types of questions, because then I'll remember it as well. So then when I see him at spring meetings, I can ask him how these things were. Or I can text him in a month and be like, hey, like, just was thinking about you, or saw Wake Forest basketball, and they cut away to him. Oh, hey, like, saw you on this, whatever. But like, little things just to show that you're remembering things about people. But isn't annoying. Like, if I were to text, if they did a little like celebrated Wake Forest football season at halftime at a basketball game that I happen to be watching, and I send a note, I'm not going to expect a response, but I would just say like, oh, super cool, like, glad you guys are still doing stuff to commemorate this. And he'll probably say, thanks, Nicole, thanks for thinking of me. But it's a lot of the little stuff, like the 5 minutes saying hello. People notice when you're putting in time and effort and thinking about them. So it's like those little things. And then again, if you do know something, like someone's daughter's applying to school, or if you do, become Instagram friends with someone that you cover and you know pretty well, then you have lots of things that could potentially be topics you could text them about. Grace, another question for you would be, when you're on a beat, how hard is it to if you want to do big features? I think everyone gets into this because they love reading great features. How hard is that to make time for that when you also have to do like injuries and all these other stuff?
Yeah, I think that's the balance, especially in season, of you don't ever want to completely abandon your beat coverage, because this is what your job is and what people are coming to you for, but you also want to make times for those stories that you really care about and that are going to make you kind of stand out a little bit more and be different, so to speak. I mean, I think a lot of it depends on who you write for, and I feel like at The Athletic we're pretty lucky in that regard, that I'm not expected to do as much day-to-day, backup right guard stubbed his toe like I might have when I was on a daily beat of a newspaper. And so I do think a lot of it is that, but I don't know, I think a lot of times in your beat coverage is when you will discover these feature stories that you want to do. So a lot of times they can coexist. I go in thinking I'm writing a story about Trevor Lawrence's interceptions, and then he says something that is more fascinating, and then from there you kind of build on it. So I do think that they can be intertwined, and certainly in the off season, I think is the time to really flex your creative muscle in that regard. Yeah, should we open it up?
All right, we can open it up to anyone who has questions, since we figure you guys will get the most out of it that way. Does anyone want to start?
I would say, okay, personal qualities a reporter should have. I would say a natural curiosity is high on my list. Observant, detailed, and then I think that a nice dose of empathy goes a long way in our field as well.
Yeah, I would say all of those things. Definitely curiosity. I know sports writers love Ted Lasso, and we all do, but the idea of being curious and not judging the people that you're covering, so that you're not going to frame a question with a tone or like the way that you word it that's like going to put someone off when it doesn't need to be. Like, if you need to ask a hard question in a certain situation, like, that's fine, but you can also ask that in a fair way. But just coming into it, even if someone has had a totally different life experience than you, but being totally open to it, open-ended questions, and letting the story go where what you find out tells you to go. And I also think, too, super observant, being willing to take notes, being willing to, again, work nights and weekends, go to things that are inconvenient. Like, the fact that people aren't going to a practice when you have access is insane to me. But there's a lot of lazy people out there, and that's where you can really make your mark, especially when you're younger, especially when you're new to a beat. But I also think, too, again, like, being able to talk to people that had different experiences than you. It's not very easy to do, and you have to like work on it. But being able to connect with people where they don't feel like, it's transactional, only, or that it's combative, or that you just are looking for a soundbite or something, but like that you genuinely care. And that's how you build that up over time. I went and did a couple different features on Florida and Billy Donovan, and then wanted to do like a big feature on him and like if he was going to stay at Florida forever. Obviously he didn't, but it was like that was the question of the story, and I needed to talk to him about his wife had a stillborn baby, stillborn birth, and they had a cemetery there. They were super involved in that, and I couldn't have asked that to him before we had spent all of this other time together. He would not have, that wouldn't have worked. So it's because you're building up a track record. So you have to be very patient is I guess what I'm trying to say, because to break news later on, but also I think like getting to the point where like someone you've interviewed trusts you and you can do a story later on is more valuable to me than breaking news, and that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. So, but yeah, I think showing up is the biggest thing, because a lot of people just don't. Like there'll be coached caravans where they'll go and do different stops around, South Carolina or whatever, and people won't go to that stuff. And that's when you can get people with their guard down a little bit. Yep. Okay, so the question is, best strategies for looking for stories or beats or jobs if introverted. Grace is introverted, so why don't you start?
I think that, kind of to Nicole's point earlier about showing up, the more you're around a certain group of people, just naturally the more comfortable they're going to get with you and you're going to get with them. And so I have used players that I have good relationships with, assistant coaches, SIDs, for story ideas all the time. Hey, I'm just kind of picking their brain about something I think is interesting, and then since we do have that relationship, it's less intimidating to kind of follow up on that. And then I think, honestly, the coolest part about maybe being a little introverted is that like you're probably naturally very observant, and so you're probably going to get a lot of story ideas just based on what you see with your eyes and your senses, and maybe some different ways that'll help you differentiate a little bit, because if you're really taking in everything that you're seeing, you're going to pick up on a lot of those things.
Some of the best stories that people will write off of, let's say, a game that's really crowded, right, like a Final Four or something where there's a lot of press, are people that didn't ask questions in the press conference. So, like, there's a lot of people who want to hear themselves talk in all of these settings, but like what Grace is saying about being observant, or like, maybe you're more drawn, you don't want to go to like the scrum around the star player, and so you go and talk to like the first guy off the bench, and he gives you a better story because you just like went over to have a conversation with him, because it was easier than screaming through a pack of other reporters somewhere else. Like, so that stuff is actually going to be really helpful. But I also found that my friends who are really introverted people, like the job, because they want to do this and connect with people and tell people stories, it gives you an excuse to like get out of your comfort zone, because you're like, well, I have to do it. I have to call this person, even though I don't really like want to, or this person's mom. But then you're like, okay, well, I'm introducing myself as Grace Raynor from The Athletic, and like this is what I'm interested in doing. They can always say no, but like you kind of have to force yourself to go out of that shell. And so it's almost like people have like two different sides, and I think they like that part too. That's part of the reason they got into it, because it was something that was different than their normal personality, I think.
Yeah, so as I'm sure every beat writer in America will tell you, like pre-COVID and post-COVID beat reporting it just night and day. I mean, I saw Dabo Sweeney in March of 2020 on Clemson's Pro Day. It was spring break. The university hadn't really quite figured out what they were going to do, and then I didn't see him again in person until I don't even know when it was. It was 18 months, whatever that math is. And so just with all of the access being on Zoom, which is such an impersonal way to talk to people anyway, and people are shouting over each other and like internet connectivity issues. I went on the Zooms, of course, because I had to, because this is my beat and I wanted to be up to date. But during COVID, I did everything I possibly could to go around Clemson and talk to as many people around the types of people that I was trying to write about as possible. So I called more high school coaches, more parents, more former teammates than ever before, because you're just not getting anything on Zoom. You're not getting anything that's different. You're not able to pull anyone to the side. DJ Uyunglele had never seen me in person. He didn't know my body language, none of this stuff. And so I certainly used Clemson for the access they did give us, and they did the best that they could in that situation. But I just tried to work around them as much as possible.
I thought it was interesting because there were a couple times like NBA players were asked kind of goofy-ish things and went viral, and people were like, why did they ask that question about like a movie they'd just seen or something? And it was so frustrating because it was obviously not journalists, because if you're in normal times, you would be joking about that stuff as everyone's putting their microphones down or as someone's coming in or out. Like, that's how you actually get to know people. So that would be another thing, like when about don't judge. I mean, you can judge a bad question. Someone asks in a press conference, go for it. But like the small talk stuff that's been missing. And so I think people were trying to do that on these formats, but it's recorded or whatever. So sometimes things get pulled out where like that actually probably was something that was looser and like actually would have been very natural as that as Steph Curry was like getting seated or something like that. So like that type of stuff, when you have it back in person, use it. Like, if you have those minutes, or you are able to, walk off the podium with someone to grab a couple of extra things that other people can't get. Like when that comes back, like use it, because it may not come all the way back the same way. Yeah, I think that a lot of them would rather control their whole story and just put everything out on like social media or the Players Tribune or somewhere where they have like the full access. A lot of college athletic departments have their own in-house feature writers, and they do videos and stuff too. So it's definitely super hard, and you need, especially in college, you need like an SID who actually understands the value of having like outside earned media. But that's where, again, like relationships, trying to, be patient and prove that, you're you're covering people really fairly, so that when you ask for a sit-down interview, that they'll hopefully go to that person and ask, or, you are getting to know people's family members and other coaches, so maybe they can also put in a word to help as well. But I think that's been the biggest challenge, is like the in-house competition and then social media as well, because the athletes, like, they don't even have to go through the proper channels to like come to a press conference to no comment now, and then they just put out whatever their side of something is on like Instagram Live, and then you have to write off of that, and that's just like not how this job should work. So I do think like it's definitely noticeable in like the NBA, which is so player driven, and like you see all these reporters kind of like doing whatever it takes to like give favorable coverage to a certain player because they know they need to have like an in with them. Where I do think you see more of like the more traditional relationship in certain other sports and other relationship in settings. But I think that is the fear that like that would continue to happen. So for us, it's based on building relationships with the SIDs and the coaches, so that these things are brought to the players and brought to the coaches, and they can decide, or the SID is saying this would be a great thing for you to do. Like, it matters to have your story told here. So just constantly saying that. But again, it's interesting because people get into communications because they weirdly like think they're on the team and want to be a bodyguard, and then there's lots of them who genuinely want to communicate the stories that are on their roster. So I don't really understand why people go into it if they don't want to like deal with the reporters, but there's definitely a lot of them, and you just kind of have to keep making your case like over and over and over again, or do what Grace is doing. We have a colleague who covers Penn State, and like the parents are off limits there, and they get like nothing, and they're still trying to use Zoom a lot, and she does a lot of recruiting stories because they're not under that purview, tries to talk to parents, exit interviews when players leave because then they're also kind of freed up. So you just have to get like really, really creative. But her work stands out to us, or at least, because a lot of people on the beat just take what's given, and it's just not much. So you really have to like keep pushing, but it's hard. I think that's the biggest issue right now.
Okay, so I got involved with AWESOME in college, Association for Women in Sports Media, and that's kind of how I got some of my internships. And then I really just honestly, I made a list of every single newspaper in the country that I would be interested in working for, and I emailed every single one of their sports editors and just said, hey, my name is Grace, I'm about to graduate, blah, 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 here are my clips, because I had worked for the student paper, here's my resume, I know you might not have anything, I'm just saying hello. And this was when I was a senior in college, probably like spring semester. And I said, I'm about to have an internship with MLB.com. It's going to end on blah, blah, blah day. Blah, here we go. And like a lot of them ignored me, and a lot of them hit me back. And one of the ones that I emailed was the Post and Courier, where I got my first job. And Gene Sabakoff actually is also a state winner. He's here this weekend, which is fun. But I think people remember that, and especially if you have clips and a resume and a cover letter to put with it, that kind of helped me. And then I just kind of had some mutual connections. I was freelancing for someone who also knew someone at the Post and Courier, and then it's just, I always say, like, the hardest job to get in this industry is your first one, and then once you're in, it just seems to get so much smaller.
Yeah, and it's kind of like when you're applying for internships. Like, once you get your first internship, it helps get the next one, because once you have a professional clip, it's so much easier, because then you're like, because then automatically sports editors are like, oh, you hit a deadline, like someone edited you, got to the point of being published, and it validates it and makes it a lot better than just like a college version of a story. But obviously you have to start with that. So my first job was was somewhere I had interned. I had interned at USA Today, and then I made sure to keep in touch with all my editors. So like I actually had I wrote a bunch of different stories on a bunch of different sports, and so like I was really close with like our golf and tennis editor, and then also our baseball editor. And then the first job I got there was as a digital editor in colleges, so it was a totally different person. But they told me that there was going to be an opening, and and they were like, there's a bunch of people who want to get you back in the door, but like they gave me a heads up, because I had kept a relationship with them where we would just text about other stuff, and it wasn't always about jobs, but they would check in during my senior year and see how things were going. But also I would text about like, oh, Serena just did this to the tennis editor, because like we love tennis. And so it was very natural when there was an opening that they hit me up and told me about it. So then I was able to talk to the person who had that job, who was moving to a different job, and talk to all these other people even before I like formally applied for it. So that was really helpful. And then when I was for different internships, I would always, one thing I would say is, when you have an internship, if you have a good relationship with your editor, you can ask them like, why did my resume stand out, or like what about my clips stood out? Because I found that was really helpful to find out specifically what jumped out, right? Because we're saying like, how do you differentiate yourself? So I had a website. I would recommend that, just kind of a living, breathing resume for all of you. And it's also, if you're doing other stuff, you're doing podcasts or radio and writing, you can put all that stuff in one place. But I did that, and but when I interned at the Boston Globe, I asked the sports editor, like, what was it about my application? And what I had done that year was I had put all my clips, and then I put a little note next to them, because I was at a workshop and someone had recommended this, and I was like, let's try it. And I put a little note explaining why I picked that article. So I put, my favorite story I'd written for my student newspaper, and explained why. It was a feature on a player who was injured. And it was about like how the loneliness of that and how isolated he felt from the team. And I did it outside of the SID and all this stuff. And it was super interesting, because usually you hear that story the next year when that person comes back and everything's happy again. So I was really proud of that story and how I'd pitched it and how, we had done it. And so I put that, in 2 sentences. And then I put, because I had interned at USA Today, and then Denard Robinson blew up as a Heisman candidate. So they had asked me to write something. So, I put that clip in there, and I explained, Yeah, so they called me at like noon, and then the deadline was 4 o'clock, and like I put this together, and they fed me some stuff from their college report or whatever, and that's the story the editor at the Globe told me got me the job, because he said, I remember reading it, I remember thinking it was a really good story, had no idea a college student wrote it, and especially for you to say that you had a time, it was the day of, they were trying to see if you could do it, and it was like 3 hours, and he was like, you know, that's what I need to know. So I would consider putting little notes next to, like kind of little explainers next to clips you're submitting. But also when you have a relationship with someone who has hired you, asking them what stood out, because then you can lean into that for the next time. It's hard. I think everyone now knows that they have to be on all these platforms. You know, I went through a round of layoffs right after I had gotten to USA Today, and you know, it became very clear to me that I was like, I'm never going to let technology pass me by, because you know, people who weren't comfortable with like just the 24/7 nature of kind of always being on deadline. People didn't want to be on Twitter. People didn't want to do, you know, take Instagram takeovers, all these different things that I would just kind of be like, sure, yeah, I'll try that, you know, and so I just, you know, I picked up TV stuff and radio stuff when the opportunity presented myself, and I was able to, you know, go meet the people who were hiring for these positions and try to do it just so I could get reps, so I'd be more comfortable. Because I remember being so nervous doing radio interviews for a really long time, but I would always say yes and ask them for a lot of topics and try to prep for it, because I knew I needed to be more comfortable with that. And then we did a Clemson podcast together, and now, you know, we both do podcasts and stuff. I find that it helps break up the week and think about the same thing that we're doing in different ways. But how do you manage like your time when, you know, it's basically full time's the writing thing, but then when you have to do radio, or like, do you always say yes? How do you balance that?
Well, first of all, Nicole is like the perfect person to talk on this topic, because this woman is like the busiest, smartest human in sports. But as a beat writer, I try to pick my radio spots that make sense for me in a way that, because I don't ever want to miss a deadline or be late on my writing or do something, I'm behind on something from The Athletic because I did other things. So I usually always say yes in market. I always say yes to Sirius, of course. I always say yes to ACC Network. Sometimes, though, if a random, I get a lot of requests randomly from states that I've never been to, and so sometimes if you have to kind of let some go by the wayside, you know, I don't think I'll ever live in Mississippi type of situation, because you do have to pick your spots, and especially when you're covering a beat. And Justin, I'm sure, knows this right now, covering Cincinnati. When you're covering a beat where there's a lot going on, you could spend, if you said yes to all of them, you would spend all your time doing this. Like in the last couple of weeks, Clemson has lost obviously both coordinators and their athletic director, and I've probably gotten 20 requests, and you just can't, I just can't say yes to all of them. So I do try to be respectful, of course, and radio is a great way to get your name out there and all those good things. But yeah, it's just a balancing act, and it gets easier with time once you kind of get used to it.
Yeah, I think what Grace said is just the most important part. It's about like figuring out what the time commitments are for different stuff before you say yes, so that you can structure it in a time frame that works. And then like for me, you know, like I've worked with my editors a couple years, so I can be like, okay, I'm doing Big Ten Network stuff on Mondays, so if something happens, I could probably help you, but like this is the time period I'll be the busiest. And they know that, and I just think there's a lot of people in the industry that balance a lot of different types of roles. So like it's very normal, like on our staff, for people to say like, oh well, I host a radio show from 11 to 1 Monday through Friday, so you just know to avoid those time frames. But I think it's great to get reps on everything. So if people give you guys opportunities, do them, because the more comfortable you can get on all of these different platforms, the better, because no one's really one-dimensional anymore. And like the writers that I know who only write and hate to do all that other stuff become less relevant the more time that goes, that they don't want to do a podcast. Also, like if your company leans into podcasts and they ask you to do it, like you should do it. Like
I say yes to everything the company asks, just to be completely clear. I never say no to my company.
No, but I'm saying like there have been people who like don't want to do it. And so again, when I was at USA Today, people didn't want to try, they didn't want to be on Twitter, didn't want to do these things. And like it just doesn't, it's like these are things that people are trying because they want to help you build your brand, build your expertise. Like when you go on a radio interview, it's because Grace is our Clemson expert. So like that's good, and I also think it stretches you in a way that maybe you don't in writing, which then, like for me, like doing TV and radio, I like figured out my opinions on stuff, and then I'll be like, oh, I should write this because like now I feel strongly about it, and so it's helped that way too. Because I do think like also all these beat jobs, you become more, they're less like just give me the straight facts and be like, what is your opinion on it, like and your analysis, like that's the uniqueness of it. So that stuff I think also helps you think that way as well.
I think the negative is the mean people. You know, there's unfortunately a lot of them, and so I personally am a huge fan of the mute button because I don't like to block people, but if you mute them, they can keep yelling at you and you'll never see it, which is awesome. And so so I feel like I'm playing a little 4D chess there too, because if you block them, you know they know. Anyway. But that's probably the biggest challenge, is that like they're going to be, especially when you write a column, there are going to be people who disagree with you, and that's kind of the whole premise of it. And there's going to be people who really push back on it, and so that's where I think you lean on, you know, your reporting and your confidence in yourself as your job, and then your friends. Like there have been many times that I've leaned on Nicole for things like that. Just surrounding yourself with people who also understand it. But there's also a lot of very nice people on social media too. So those are the good ones. Caitlin's smirking.
Yeah, go to the investigative panel at 3 o'clock. Caitlin's going to talk on that one. Because people also don't like when you do that, that type of reporting. Yeah, no, I think the key is to just try to avoid what you see. So, like, there's going to be points where if it's really bad, you have to, like, be like, okay, send it to, like, the legal department or, like, human resources. But in a lot of the cases where, like, I've written about stuff like that, like Urban Meyer and, like, Zach Smith allegations, or COVID was a huge hotspot. People did not, like, that was when you could finally change your setting where, like, people couldn't reply to tweets. And people are like, oh, like, well, she can't handle it. I'm like, no, do you see what's happening to every single tweet? Like, all of these Ohio State fans are furious that they may not be playing their season or taking it out on their messenger. So I did that for a while just to avoid it. But also I changed my Twitter settings. Like I can only see, I can click on a tweet and look down, but in my, like when I click on my mentions, it's just people I follow. So it's only people that I've chosen to follow tweeting at me. For a while it was people that followed me, because that was also a good indicator. Like they're not going to yell at a woman tweeting about sports if they are actively following a woman who works in sports, usually. But so like there's different ways you can do that where you're at least controlling what is coming directly to you. But in situations like we've had colleagues, Katie Strang and Lindsay Jones. Lindsay asked Peyton Manning about allegations about the trainer at his retirement press conference, and he hadn't been available. Like it was coming back up again. Everyone was talking about his legacy. It needed to be asked, but she got a lot of vitriol for days, weeks maybe. And what we had to do at that point was have somebody else take over her accounts. So I've done this with multiple friends as well, where I would say, Grace, here, I'm changing my password. You're now in control of it. So someone else is reading through and deleting and then figuring out what needs to get reported, just so you personally don't have to do it. So I'd also recommend that. I know there's not a lot of women in here, but like I would keep that as a note. And also as a male colleague, if you see a female colleague being harassed and dealing with all of this, public support makes a huge difference. Private support also makes a huge difference. And even you could offer to take over the account and like just kind of sift through it. Because usually after a couple days it dies down. But that's the hardest part, I think, because you just don't want to read people saying, it's not personal, but they're saying it directly to you. So somebody else controlling it helps. Do we have any other questions? Yes, Dad. Do you have a question? I did. I was listening for the question. Okay. Actually, I'll pull a question out of it. How do you handle the interview? Like, when you have a bunch of questions or things that you want to make sure you get to, you don't know how much time you're necessarily going to get, and then you do want to listen and see where the interview goes. How do you keep all of that in your head?
I always try to, like, of course you have the questions you absolutely have to ask. Like, I cannot leave this interview without asking X, Y, and Z. So I always try to make sure that if I accomplish nothing else in this interview, I have hit on those. But I also am a huge fan of the follow-up because, to your point, Mr. Auerbach, about listening, there have been so many times when a player has said something and that I never knew or surprised me, or in some cases confused me, and you just and it's taken the interview in a completely different direction just because you actually listened to what they said and followed up on it. So I think it's a balance, especially when Nicole said you're under a time crunch and an SID is breathing down your neck and you only have a certain number of minutes. But and then I try to, anytime I can go back, I can, if whether it's a phone call or a text, or I need to fill it out with their parents or coaches, people around them can kind of help too. But it is kind of this weird tango where you're trying to maximize your time but also listen as well as possible.
Also, the worst, like, not listening and not asking a natural follow-up that I've ever experienced. I mean, there's some all-timers, but I was covering, it would have been Alabama-Washington, or is that Clemson? Washington. In the Sugar Bowl, in the semifinal of Alabama? Yeah, was that Alabama? Yeah, but who did they play? Alabama? Alabama, okay. So at that Sugar Bowl, it's like, you had all this access with players. One of the players starts telling me and like 3 people about proposing to his girlfriend like the week prior. So you're like, oh, this is something new and interesting that's happened since the season ended. So, me and this other writer is like, oh, like, what's her name? What, how long are you thinking about this? And then this other guy goes, talk about Alabama's run defense. In the like, we had this whole little like back and forth going, and it was just like, it just killed the whole thing. So never be that person. Read the room. Listen. That was a much more interesting story than, a generic quote about like, oh, they're really good at stopping the run. Okay. So like, that's also where like people just don't listen. Like, just fundamentally do not listen, or like observe, or, again, read the room. But also, Dad, to your point, it's a lot of hurry up and wait. You get somewhere and you just stand there and wait. I have been covering playoff expansion meetings all year where I just sit in a hallway all day, and then they come out and they say, we haven't decided anything. It's terrible, but I'm going because A, I'm there. Not everyone's been to all of these meetings. B, I get in the night before and I stake out the hotel lobby and see all the important people. And C, at some point they're gonna decide something and they wanna be there. So that's the exact example of like, literally, they feel bad for me. They've come up and they're like, oh my God, I can't believe you have to cover this. I'm like, I can't believe you guys haven't decided something yet. Like, that would be really helpful. But it's like, it's just hurry up, wait. I'm getting there at 8 a.m., waiting until they break at 4. Nothing is happening in a lot of these situations, but you're there because it's important to be there. So it's just a lot of waiting in this profession. Do we have any other questions? Probably have 10 minutes max, or you guys can get boxed lunches and a refill on your drinks. Justin, do you have any questions for us? Really? Ooh, okay. So this question is about how do you get from the point where you're building a source and you have information, and then getting to the point where you can actually report it?
That is, I think, the hardest part of our job. Because I feel like I've been having, especially this year, as I've gotten more comfortable on Clemson, I've been having like more conversations on background before, which I feel like can be kind of fuzzy, because you're like, so on background would mean it's not for attribution, right? Like, it's not off the record, but it's not so and so. You're not going to quote them directly, and so sometimes I feel like that's where I usually get my most interesting stuff, but then I'm also like, well, what do I do with this? So I usually try to err on the side of caution and just say, are you comfortable with me paraphrasing this, or not? I will not use your name, blah, blah, blah. And I tell them how I will present them. And I think that's half the battle, is just them knowing how they will be presented. Because if I say, a former player, I'm going to grant him some anonymity. If I say a former linebacker who, was second string and got injured in this game, people are going to know who you're talking about. So, but honestly, and this is something I talk to Nicole about a lot because I think she's really good at this, and I think our national reporters are really good at it because it is hard. Like, because if you burn them once, even if it's an accident, it's kind of hard to come back from.
But it probably shouldn't be an accident because you should, like, I will, when I'm building a relationship with someone, sometimes I'll say, hey, like, assume we're off the record. We text, we're chatting. I'm interested in your perspective on this thing and just would love to build a relationship. And I actually did that a lot in COVID. I cold emailed people and was like, I've always been interested in, I think your perspective on this stuff is really good. So then when I'll sometimes say, could I use this or could I ask you about this on background? So I wouldn't quote you and this is what I was thinking about identifying you as. Is this okay? Sometimes when you're trying to confirm something that's over text, I'll even if it's someone I haven't had that, that I think assumes everything is on the record because it is unless otherwise, right? I'll just say, can I use that? Can I go with that? And then I'll even I'll sometimes like when something's happening and you're sending out like 10 texts and 9 of them are not going to respond to you, but I'll put in that message, be like, hey, blah, 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 looking to confirm this. I would refer to you as a person with knowledge of the situation, or I would say, a former whatever, or an FBS athletic director said. I'll put that in the long message that you're sending, because I want them to know that right up front. So that's what I'm saying. Like, it shouldn't be an accident because they should know that they're on the record, or they should know if they're on background, and I think they should deserve to know how they're being identified because you don't want to burn them, and also like. I don't know. I mean, I would never just like tweet something that I wasn't sure was on the record or whatever. And part of the reason the question earlier about like players bypassing the media or like not, going to their own avenues, I'm sure that some of those athletes got burned by something that wasn't supposed to. So like it ends up burning it for everybody. So I think you just have to be really careful of that. But I would wait the extra 2 minutes to ask somebody, do you mind? Can I use this? Even if you're pretty sure that they can. So maybe I'll be 2 minutes late, but especially the first time with someone. And also, like, another thing, I don't think they talk about this enough. Like, I don't know. I'd like someone to tell me a couple things and be right a couple times before I then put my name on it and say that I think that they're trustworthy. Because sometimes people think that they're closer to a situation than they are. So, like, I'd rather you tell me stuff, this person's getting fired tomorrow. This person signed this contract. And then not be too sure, couldn't get a second source, and then you were right on both of them, and you tell me a third thing, then I say, okay, now I go to my editor, I say, this is a good source. They've been right about 3 things now. But you don't have to go with it the first time. I've seen that people get burned about that as well because, they seemed like they knew what they were talking about, but you didn't have a track record yet. Any other questions? Yes. Yeah, I think I would go out of my mind if I only wrote serious stuff. I think you have to be able to. Well, first of all, some places like your job might be to only write serious stuff, but like our outlet, like goofy X's and O's, every feature, like it includes all of it. Plus, like those stories were really fun. We didn't have any like super viral fans this year, but like it was fun. And other writers started to do these types of stories when it would happen in like the sport they were covering or the team they were covering. Because it was really hard to find the people. Like, you don't know their name, and you get this one glimpse of them. So I was always, like, really proud of them because it was really hard, actually. And people were just like, yeah, why is someone bringing knitting stuff to why are they at a Kansas football game in the first place, right? And so it'd be, like, both those things. And, it turns out it was a great story. So I liked doing those, and I think, like, it helped offset being like, I'm writing about, like, the state of the NCAA and stuff. And so it showed range as well, which I think was helpful. But I think I would go crazy.
I would second all of that. It's the fun part that kind of breaks up the not so fun parts. And people love it. Like, one of my best-selling stories a couple of years ago was the girl who looked exactly like Trevor Lawrence on TikTok. Like, that did better than any other football story I wrote the whole season, because people, like, they like to know that they're being connected to a viral moment through you.
Yeah, I was going to say that if the fans are, like, talking about something, then you should think about, look, like, it doesn't have to be like, oh, I'm chasing clicks. It's more like people were interested in this girl, like, impersonating Trevor Lawrence. So, like, maybe there's a story there, instead of immediately dismissing it because it is too, like, offbeat or not really, like, serious about football. I will say, like, as a woman, though, you do have to, like, make sure that you're, like, not only doing stuff like that, because then you can get immediately labeled as, like, you can't write about football or you don't know about football. But I think once you have a track record and want to have some fun, it's flexibility. Yes. Grace covers one of these coaches, Dabo. Where do you think it's coming from?
Like, in regards to wanting to control the message, I think a lot of times it comes with coaches who, well, okay, I will say this. I feel like I'm actually pretty fortunate at Clemson because Dabo is not of the Saban method of no freshmen, no coordinators. Like, our access is very, very good at Clemson. I do think that as teams start to win more and the spotlight is on them more and they are feeling all this pressure, that's when you start to kind of see some of these things. And so I don't know that there's anything you can do about it other than just covering them the same way. But honestly, to me, though, I think that it's kind of fascinating because that, to me, is a story. Like, the way people change or maybe don't change as they succeed. I think is fascinating. But yeah, we have a lot of coworkers, Penn State included, who I'm in awe of that they do their jobs every day. Like, I feel extremely spoiled that I have access to talk to people we should be allowed to talk to regularly.
I also think some of the stuff with NIL, it'll be interesting to see if people kind of challenge some of that, because you would think that you can't really, I would think you can't ban freshmen in this. Like, after Spencer Rattler wasn't allowed to be interviewed, that was a pushback. I was like, I don't think you can do that because you're affecting his earning potential. If he was the game-winning quarterback, or it was Caleb Williams, right? That's who wasn't allowed. So I think you're going to see more pushback to that, and then also some of the NIL deals. Like, if you got a deal with the Cheez-Its for, tied to the Cheez-It Bowl, I would think the Cheez-It people could set up interviews, or you could set up interviews on your own because it helps you to get out there. So I think that's something I want to follow and just see if people kind of push back on a little bit, because I think that some of these places, like our Oklahoma writer who was dealing with a place with Lincoln Riley, was really tightly, he's the reason that Caleb Williams wasn't allowed to be interviewed. Like, previously, earlier in the season, he went to a card signing thing that Spencer Rattler did and was like, it was outside of Oklahoma's purview, right? So I think is hopefully going to change some of that too, or at least force the coaches to have to pull back a little bit in recruiting. Yeah.
I think coaches are going to start using it against each other in recruiting if they don't change it. Like, why would you want to go to a school if you're trying to sell a kid on coming to my school? Come here where I'll let you talk to the media and build your brand. Why would you want to go to one of these schools where you're going to have no access? So I think recruiting will change it.
Plus, you get to talk to Grace if you go to Clemson. Come on. But yeah, no, I think that stuff too, because not that they want to talk to us, but in order to get deals, yeah, they need to be out there and be like spokesmen of stuff. Because had DJ done much before he got his deals, or not really?
We talked to DJ a little bit when he was back up last year, and he was on limits as a freshman. But then he got all of his deals kind of as he was coming into the spotlight, so it was kind of simultaneous in that regard. Yeah, we talked to him a lot before the Notre Dame game, after, because we knew, and Clemson knew, he would not be available for Notre Dame. So yeah, he talked to us a lot before then. Yeah, they made him available after. He's been made available after every game, and he's usually made available once a week on Mondays, with the exception of one or two exceptions per season.